Aperture.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Hi, Deborah. Hi, Isaac. My name is Susan Miller. I'm going to make a brief introduction here, and then we're going to get right into the event. I'm the Executive Director of McEvoy Foundation for the Arts, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this very special conversation with Isaac Julien and Deborah Willis. These two pioneering and talented creative leaders join us to talk about the power of the medium of photography, the role of the archive in their research, and the 19th century daguerreotype artist, J.P. Ball, among other topics. This event is co-produced by Aperture New York and McEvoy Arts in San Francisco. As many of you who follow us know, Isaac Julien's Lessons of the Hour, Frederick Douglass, is on view at McEvoy Arts. And although we are currently closed because of the pandemic, the exhibition will continue at least through March 13th, 2021. And before I begin, I'd like to thank our speakers, Isaac and Deborah, as well as the leadership and staff of Aperture and McEvoy Arts for their inspired contributions to this collaboration. I also share a very special appreciation to Nyan McEvoy, Leslie Berriman, and the McEvoy family for their generous spirit that brings us together today. A bit of housekeeping. Our conversation will include a question and answer session at the end, so please contribute your questions via the Q&A, not the chat. And now to our speakers, a brief introduction. Deborah, as an award-winning American author, educator, scholar, and curator, Deborah Willis's research examines photography's multifaceted histories, visual culture and identity, and notions of beauty. She has written and co-authored numerous groundbreaking books on Black photographers and photography, including J.P. Ball, Daguerrean and Studio Photographer from 1993, Posing Beauty, African-American Images from the 1890s to the present from 2009, and Envisioning Emancipation, Black Americans at the End of Slavery in 2012. Her most recent release is The Black Civil War Soldier, A Visual History of Conflict and Citizenship from NYU Press, just out. She is the recipient of the MacArthur and Guggenheim Fellowships, as well as 2 NAACP Image Awards for her publication. She is University Professor and Chair of the Department of Photography at the Tisch School of Arts at NYU. And Isaac Julien is a British filmmaker and installation artist whose creative practice often features personal and poetic explorations of historical figures. Past projects include his documentary drama on author Langston Hughes, which won him a prize at the Cannes Film Festival, and another on Frantz Fanon. Recent projects include Lena Bobardi, A Marvelous Entanglement, and Lessons of the Hour, Frederick Douglass. His work has been exhibited around the globe, including at the Museum of Modern Art, New York, the Pompidou Center in Paris, and the Venice Biennale. Julien has received numerous accolades and awards for his accomplishments, including his appointment to the Commander of the Order of the British Empire in 2017. He is Distinguished Professor of Arts at UC Santa Cruz. So without further delay, I thank you all and welcome Isaac and Deborah. Please begin.
Thank you so much. Wonderful introduction, and it's just a pleasure to be here with Isaac and to see over 250 people here to join us. So thank you for those out there. Isaac, we've been friends for a long time, and I remember the first time we met in 1989 in England, and the opportunity for us to talk today means a lot. It just helps me remember how much we love the archive, and to have that experience, it's such a pleasure.
No, it's amazing, Deborah. Honestly, I mean, I know that when I first made that early film, Looking for Langston, 1989, I can cast my mind back to meeting you and you knowing absolutely every single person that was in the archive footage of that film. You know, I mean, of course, I came across it and just saw these amazing Black artists kind of painting and drawing and doing all of these wonderful things, nothing that I ever learned in my art school. And, you know, but you knew their names, you knew who they were. You said, well, actually, Isaac, maybe, you know, that person wasn't actually gay, etc., etc. He, you know, but you knew all their names, and it was you identified all the artists, you know, in the footage, you know, which of course I don't think, you know, the archivists, you know, institution that I got those things from were aware of.
Well, you know, it was exciting for me because I spent that decade of the 80s processing and cataloging the photographs at the Schomburg Center. So it was really important to see how you used it and just to think about that experience. I want to walk through, just to also thank you for your leadership in our field of the archival study. I also want to think about the idea of how we look at love and beauty. And you also acknowledge romantic love in your work, the love of relationships and the love of art. And so that sense of romantic love is central to this work. And we rarely talk about romantic love in 19th century photography, you know, in 19th century life, because we're always looking at struggle. And I really appreciate that as a sense of leading us through a life that we rarely talk about. So I want to begin with sharing the screen and to open up with the image of, open up with this, okay. With the, I don't know if it's coming up. Yes, maybe it is. And to start off with the slideshow, as we begin with the slideshow, and to consider this image here in this film. As you're thinking about looking for Langston and the way that we look for Langston in sound, in imagery, and in film. Tell us, again, in terms of the eulogy that you use this reference of text in this. Can you talk about this a little bit after we finish this?
Sure.
Of mind and heart, of intellect and passion was on display. It guided us through treacherous landscape, as it did when you wrote these words. Words every rebel, every dissident, every revolutionary, every practicing artist, from Cape Town to Poland, from Waycross to Dublin, could memorize. A person does not lightly elect to oppose his society. One would much rather be at home among one's compatriots than be mocked and detested by them.
So as we move forward into the next slide in this one, and we'll stop after this and we'll begin to think about this experience again, as we look at Harlem, 125th Street, sound, black and white, mobility. Such an iconic shot as we reimagine what it experienced for us to visit Harlem.
Sun's a setting. This is what I'm gonna sing. The sun's a setting. This is what I'm gonna sing. I feel the blues are coming. Wonder what the blues will bring. I got those sad old weary blues. I don't know where to turn. I don't know where to go. Nobody cares about you when you sink so low. What shall I do? What shall I say? Blues for you.
And now to this last clip, Gaze in Champagne. Just beauty, the way, the lighting, the experience, the joy.
You make things with water, bound to turn it blind. I say you mix things with water, bound to turn it blind. You run around with funny people, you'll get a streak of it off your back. There was a time when I was alone, my freakish way to treat. There was a time when I was alone, my freakish way to treat. But they're so common now, you get one every day in the week.
So let's stop there and kind of think about these moments of that we're sharing here. And I'm going to stop. No, I'll keep this up, but just to keep going with that image. Can you talk about what things that you were experiencing then with finding the archive and the sound?
Well, you know, I think one of the things about sort of making Looking for Langston was indeed the journey to Harlem, that Harlem was the epicenter. And I think one of the things in making Looking for Langston, which became so pivotal, was what do you do when you actually don't have an archive? You know, when you have like a kind of non-access to the archive, when the images, which in terms of moving images at least, don't exist. We came across a footage, which was around 125th Street, of young Black children running for a cart, like, you know, literally in the middle of the road. And it's such a joyous image. And it was one of the only images that we had, moving images at that particular time of African-American, like, people. I mean, literally, I mean, you know, if you go to the 20s and 30s, I mean, it's so rare, or it was rare in terms of the archival work that had been done at that particular moment. And so the question of reinvention, of, in a way, turning to the photographic archive as a central motif for exploring these questions became invaluable. And in a way, I would say that the invaluable nature of it was really to kind of have presented within the signifying practices of African-American culture in terms of music, the very kind of nuanced development around sound and music. And, you know, music was the kind of discourse of desire, empathy, and love, which was used as the kind of, if you like, stakeholder against the ways in which these people were being subjugated and oppressed, you know. So, you know, love is the message and the message is death. No, that's not the zeitgeist in terms of the African-American communities and Black diaspora communities, in terms of the struggle for survival. And also, I think if we move away from what I call the master discourse of race relations between Blacks and whites, we can see within the intricate tapestry, and this is what I was trying to do in this work, is to create the kind of spaces between the gaps and silences, you know, of the archive, the sort of, and reinvigorate them with that desire, which you can see within the grand tradition of African-American blues and song. And so I think, you know, I was using that as my guide. And so there are so many archival strands in terms of radio, the eulogy in the beginning of Toni Morrison, which was recorded at the time of James Baldwin's memorial in 1987, when I first embarked on the research, and to use that as a kind of line to describe this question of the artists and their position, and the antagonism, let's say with American culture, and how, that is a kind of zeitgeist for artists in terms of their kind of working ideas. So for me, it was really pivotal. But meeting you, Deborah, was so important because you were there at the other end, of this kind of, transatlantic exchange, doing this work when nobody else was doing it, when people didn't think it was important.
Right, and that's why I think when we first met, I felt that this work was transformative for me, and because I love the literary arts that I experienced in Harlem, working in Harlem. I didn't get it in high school. I didn't get that except for Langston Hughes, which I'm so happy I had the experience of Langston Hughes' poems growing up. But the experience that you're contemplating and reflecting on also the history of photography, the way that you use shadows in that last scene of Gaze and Champagne, going up the steps, that just guides me into mystery, and so I love the way that you bring that together. And that's why I really believe the whole idea of beauty being a curative experience, like we're kind of, like saving our moments and recovering moments. But I just wanted to begin with that and to start with our love of reconstructing and recovering both Frederick Douglass and J.P. Ball.
Absolutely.
Right. So I just the connection of the two, I think is powerful in lessons. And I'm excited about that experience. And what made you think about coordinating the exhibition? This is a slide of the photograph of J.P. Ball in the frontispiece of my book. I was at the end of the research of my book in 91. And which
I have here in my hand. It all begins with you, Deborah, And
I discovered a photograph of Ball in another book entitled Seattle's Black Victorians. And to see that title and to think about Black Victorians and to see Ball in the book, it really excited me. And then another project that continues from that experience is the new book, and its focuses on the idea of memory, personal and public. And this is the experience of the Black Civil War soldier. This is the cover of the book.
Can't wait to get it.
Yes, yes, in sharing that. But let's talk about how you're marrying and mirroring these two figures of how do you see this lyrics of sunshine and shadow?
Well, Deborah, because of your book and the archival work that you had done in relationship to J.P. Ball that nobody else had done really in the way it kind of materialized itself, until I came across your book, which gave me, the kind of apparatus or the signs in relationship to how to reconstruct one's own tintypes. And so this tintype here, on the right, is a younger J.P. Ball that I've sort of constructed, obviously with the help with a fantastic tintype specialist, Ball, Mr. Ball 2. So you have Mr. Ball 2 and Mr. Ball 1. and this actor who I thought had this kind of resemblance to J.P. Ball was astonishing. And this work appears in the McEvoy exhibition along with several other tintypes. But it was really so important to be able to have access to these amazing sort of pivotal material items that you had, if you like, unearthed. And of course, I had this other etching here of J.P. Ball's salon, But, Deborah, you're the person who's the expert on this. So.
Just to think about this salon and his gallery, and just to know that he created this panorama of Black life from Africa to the Americas in that experience. And just imagine people walking through, of course, the panorama is lost. We know it's going to appear somewhere, I hope during my lifetime to see it. But to think about how he created his salon, and this is the advertisement in terms of his JP balls, and we can see the seriousness and the importance of his studio, where you recreate this. You know, I love it. I love the fact that you thought of dress. You know, your makeup artists, your fashion costume artists are all a part of this remaking and this recreation. Let's talk about how you found this area of looking at that graphic, that detail, and to create the Venus figure, to create the paintings, but also the gestures that you have shared in this.
Oh my God, I mean, everybody went to town on this, Deborah. You know, we looked at the amazing etching that had been found of J.P. Ball's salon, and then we basically replicated this. This is actually in the Royal Academy of Arts in London, but I had to kind of completely recurate the room. So everything pictorially has been reinstalled by me and my team. Derek Brown, the art director, actually went to Frederick Douglass's house with me in Washington, and also the cinematographer, Nina Kalgren, both who were the key sort of artistic group of the making of Looking for Langston. So I assembled the Looking for Langston team to make this work because I wanted to have that detail to the image and the construction. And then, of course, we were able to luckily get some original daguerreotypes and tintypes, which are displayed on the table from a private collection. And the person actually showing the tintypes to our actor, Ray Ferron, who's playing Frederick Douglass, was the actual curator and keeper of that collection. And we have Annie, we have Ocelyn in the green dress, J.P. Ball behind her, Frederick Douglass's wife in the corner, and various other historical characters. And in a way, I think it was really to kind of reveal the very rich milieu, cosmopolitan milieu that J.P. Ball had, and also at the same time to sort of have this utopian image of this sort of, if you like, interracial interaction that would have occurred in a daily occurrence in his salon. You know, I mean, his clients were, you know, from all the different races, and you know, he was pretty famous, you know, and pretty successful at this time, where I'm imagining it's in Cincinnati, you know. So yeah, but there's a, you know, so I mean, it was a fantastic.
It's really important that the interplay of this that you're using here, this self-emancipated man who uses his body in terms of how do we go to the photographer's studio? How do we create and recreate a self-emancipated man? And we think of racial justice through these images. But the fact that you're using these beautifully encased daguerreotypes and ambrotypes and all of these, the busts and the paintings, to really reset the significance of photography and how art was to Ball and to Douglass. And here you're showing the stereograph and that experience. And these are just, I'm going to flip through some of the Ball photographs where he photographed Frederick Douglass and another woman in Cincinnati, Maddie Allen. So what we're thinking about, we know this is during slavery. Cincinnati was a free city. Many Blacks lived there, abolitionists lived there. We know that photography was central in recreating the story. And here you're doing your research also at the University of Rochester, or going through an exhibition and finding one of the early photographs of Douglass. And this is significant, the way that you're placing these images.
Yes, of course, this is where, Frederick Douglass lived in Rochester, as you know, for most of his life. And it's where he produced the North Star newspaper with his wife, Anna Murray Douglass. And of course, it's the place that actually commissioned me, the Memorial Art Gallery, which is the University Museum of Rochester, commissioned this work. And John Hanhart and Jonathan Binstock, curator and director, had the foresight to commission me to bring me to the archive. And so, of course, for me, this reignited the whole, if you like, looking for Langston kind of genre of the archive within me once I saw this amazing portrait of Douglass.
When we think about the rare public monuments to Black people, and to use this experience of photography as celebrating a monument in that way, and having this notion of picturing Frederick Douglass and his story as a way to use the way he used his pose and the way that you're recreating the pose. So you want to talk about this image here in terms of hair?
Well, hair is, as you know, very significant aesthetic concern for Black people. And I think in a way, one of the things in terms of Douglass, at least, was, in a kind of iconographic sense, the way that his pose was always on like a tabula rasa blank screen behind, never a pictorial image, never actually really smiling ever. He didn't want any caricature. He was using photography as a kind of, if you like, weapon to, contest the kind of dominant racist regimes of stereotyping and caricature, which was, in a way, completely dehumanizing African Americans at that time. And he, of course, saw photography not as something which was neutral, that it could be something which could be appropriated in different sorts of ways. But I think, he was, in a way, if you like, the Cindy Sherman of his times. He certainly was someone who was using portraiture and his own self-image as a way to make art and to contest the very narrow repertoire of images which was being produced at the time. So what I've done is really just to really emulate both the kind of framing and the lighting, of course, with lots of help from my friends.
His physical presence and understanding his message is created in this. What process is this one, this contemporary process? What is this?
Well, this is actually a tintype. And if you see the film, you actually see this tintype processed within the film. So as I said, I had a tintype specialist, Mr. Ball one, who helped with these tintypes, and they were produced on set. And if you see the 10-screen work at McEvoy, you'll see it, in sort of, in conversation with the other screens, this kind of process. So I was really interested in the processing of deconstructing how the tintype, this 19th century invention, was made, which revolutionized the way in which portraiture and democratized this form of art and representation.
It made it available for people to purchase.
Precisely.
With the Civil War soldier. But I'm also excited that you have Anna Murray Douglass reproduced here in this, sense of beauty, her hair pulled back, the look that she has is reflective in reflections, and the way that that's posed. So it's really important the way that you're telling this story. And as we think of this lyrics of sunshine and shadow, Three Graces, wonderful moment here. Were the frames recreated as well in terms of, or did you have someone in mind that you, who created the framing?
No, I mean, the frames were literally kind of, replicated from the original frames of daguerreotypes and tintypes, which I had found in this private collection. So we replicated this, fantastic framer in San Francisco, who, yeah. And you'll see there's a frame within the frame here. So there's,
I see it.
There's a kind of play,
Then having the gold leaf mat.
Yes.
Creating instance there. And that's really important. So just going through a few more Ball images as we move forward, because I can stay here all day with you. But Ball, as I mentioned, he photographed Civil War soldiers. And, in the book here that I just published, we'll see that his studio, but it says Ball Studios on West 4th Street, and there's a Civil War soldier, a white Union officer with a backdrop of tents. So we see a sense of fields on the ground, the battleground, and in that studio portrait. But also he photographed, his sense of place was important, because this is a photograph on the right. I'm not sure if it's your right or left in terms of the viewer, but it's really an important photograph. When I first saw it, I was appalled by it. It stopped me because I thought the guns, the pistols were at her head, pointed at her head. Reading more about the posing of 19th century Civil War soldiers is that the sense of bravery, when they put their photograph, when they put the pistol to their chest, it was a sense of bravery and manhood. And that here we see a young woman who was cross-dressed to be a boy, to pretend to be a boy, to leave Kentucky, to move over the river to Cincinnati as they were going through the, quote, Underground Railroad to her safety in Wisconsin. So they took the time to stop at his photographic studio to pose in women's dress. And we can see that she's a woman. And where this photograph is it sent back to abolitionists? Is it sent back to family? But it's important that this woman was a significant figure in the Underground Railroad in sense of place. Let's talk about your installation here. Where is he speaking in this crowd?
Well, I mean, Frederick Douglass was someone who actually had to leave the US as a fugitive slave at the time of the release of his autobiography. And he was, terrified of being re-enslaved and had become so famous really on the publication of this book, which of course was a kind of masterpiece, but he went to the United Kingdom, to Ireland and to England and Scotland, which he actually made his home for almost 2 years. And in some senses, it was quite a lonely exile. I have to say that I'm completely indebted to Celeste Barnier, who is a Douglass historian, and to all the historians actually have been working on Douglass, Skip Gates, several other people who, in a way, Skip's work on photography and Celeste's intimate knowledge of Douglass enabled me to really take this sort of artistic and aesthetic license to reconstruct him speaking to audiences, of which he spoke to, he gave hundreds and hundreds of lectures. And it was these lectures which actually galvanized his freedom when the Richardson sisters campaigned and enabled him to return back to the United States as a free man. And so there's a way in which, in this installation with you here, we have J.P. Ball's photographic studio, which is a reoccurring motif in the work. We also have him talking to the audience, and there you see the development of the tintype in process, all displayed in this sort of salon hang, emulating that 19th century hang, which of course we accustomed to, but Douglass certainly would have viewed, since he would have been allowed to go into museums in the UK as opposed to United States.
I just want to mention, when you said Celeste Bernier, the importance of this book, If I Survive, Frederick Douglass and the Family in the Walter O. Evans collection. She has an amazing, this collection has an amazing number of letters and writings about Frederick Douglass through the notion of family.
Oh,
And
she's an astonishing scholar, Douglas, astonishing.
And here, talking about family, when we think about the precious lives of children, they were photographed in the studio. Here again, family, when we think of Anna Murray Douglass, this is a drawing from a photograph. This is in the National Park Service collection. And then photographs of his mother, J.P. Ball's mother. We see it, it's just as Ma Ball. And here we began dress. You know, we rarely talk about 19th century dress. We rarely talk about women and their bonnets, the importance of how we think about women who were matriarchs, who also workers, and that experience. And here you recreate the Lady of the Lake here in this studio.
Yes, I mean, in a way, I think there's a way in which, if we think about Anna Murray Douglass, the question of portraiture, I mean, of course, she is not in the foreground in the same way, although she's equally there in terms of struggle, you know, against slavery, for, you know, for abolition of slavery, the Underground Railroad. She, you know, managed Douglass's affairs financially. She, you know, contemplated chefs. She was amazing seamstress and made Douglass his clothes. So the question of styling of the image is so centrally important in this. But in Lady of the Lake, I was really taking the sort of important sort of Scottish pivotal text artwork of literature, which so inspired Frederick Douglass and Anna Murray Douglass, and to take this pictorial, sartorial relationship to her dress in blue, its ballooning, the Lady of the Lake, and to situate her in this kind of, in the apparatus of J.P. Ball's studio. Of course, I know there are things which are inaccurate. I mean, there shouldn't be a colored backdrop. You know, in the 19th century, that would have been black and white, for example, rather than colored. And, you know, but artistically, in terms of thinking about painting and portraiture, all of these things come together in terms of the scenography of making the work.
But, you know, he hired Duncanson, the portrait, the landscape and portrait painter, Duncanson, Black, to paint some of the backdrops. So we know that they were full of color, as you're imagining here. We see, you know, your studio and the way that you've created it. It's, I feel as if that you've entered into the archive and it spoke back to you, you know, just in terms of how do we make this, you know, as accurate as possible. Here, a take from the making of Lessons of the Hour in terms of this scene.
Yes, but you can see there's Nina Carlgren, myself, and we have our actors, performers, Mr. J.P. Ball one leading there, who was a tintype specialist on set, and, you know, all the various apparatus, you know, this very muted kind of color scheme that we wanted to achieve. And
your mood reference board, you know, it's exciting to see this. You know, you have the camera, you have images, you have text, and it's just up against this brick wall and on this board to keep you inspired. And these are thinking about Ball when he moved to Helena, Montana. He photographed Black Masons. You know, here is an unidentified Mason, a young Chinese man here in terms of his dress, and a Black woman who is, in terms of, we think about cross-cultural experiences, look at the pin on her dress and the sense of style that she's created. It has a very Asian style, stylized look. But then the experience of Ball hired to photograph the hanging, the execution of William Biggerstaff, who entered into this Northwest Territory as a free man, leaving Arkansas. Here we see him in the studio, posed, and unfortunately with the sheriff and the townspeople when he's lynched and executed, and through his lifetime photographed within this casket. And so when we think about your image again of the reflection of you in the casket and thinking about death and thinking about this experience here as Ball documents it. So we have these range of experiences. And then this is one image that was just shared with me by a colleague of mine, and this is Sean Nolan, who is Greg French shared his information, but my colleague who I teach with sent this image to me because looking at a plantation scene and what do we see here in terms of lifestyle? When I think about your photographs, you're doing the exact same. You're looking at dress, the stylized dress of the white women in the image, but the photographer hand tinted as well, as you can see the pink bringing life in another way. But the Black figures in the image, there's a woman who is central back in back of this tree, this cut off tree that is holding a hat, wearing an apron, and a young girl with a broom that's allegedly sweeping the grounds. But we see this ground space. But we see in the foreground that the person who owns this image is questioning what this pole means. Is it a whipping post? What is this post? It's a cutoff tree, but what does it mean? You know, but it has a lot of reflections in terms of thinking about the experience of slavery when thinking about this. And here again, and we think about this image in the front with what the man, the probably the owner of this plantation with his vest, and then we see this image here. So we have a few minutes left. We have like 2 minutes to our time, but I just wanted to go through a few more images of your installation. Do you want to make any comments about some of these?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, in a way, we're thinking here about the question of the apparatus and, if you like, both the pictorial and indexical nature of the image. And I would say that in my work, what I'm trying to do is to reconnect that to the way in which photography as an archival object is able to give us the information about the past, but there's a reflection into the future in terms of how it can be re-signified. And so I'd say that in terms of the actual exhibition, it's really about also the contemporaneous aspect of photography and its role in society, in relationship to questions around racial justice, in relationship to, if you like, the reflection of where we are today. And so in the exhibition, there's a wonderful exhibition created by Mark Nash, When Life is a Protest, which is taken from one of the sort of finale photographs in the exhibition. But we can see this sort of long line in terms of the role of photography and the way in which both the frame and the kind of marking of certain iconic moments historically, which are part of Nyon's amazing collection, which we're so honored to work with.
You see here Consuelo Kanaga, you know, where she's photographing Anne Marie Merriweather. Here there's a collection that most people don't know the work of Kanaga, which is important to acknowledge. But to also Dan Wiener, his photograph of Martin Luther King, another 1956 image to Stephen's photograph of Angela Davis, and just to see these range of images and hear, you know, the powerful moments of, as we think about framing and reframing and what happens with the use of these contemporary images, and just moments of how these stories are retold through framing.
And of course, there's a bit of a motif going here in relationship to the frame and the importance of framing. And I think in Lorraine O'Grady's amazing performative portraits, where she takes the frame itself and lends it as a sort of moving vista in which to frame actions and gestures, poses. I think this is such an important work. And I was in a way hinting at this work in relationship to this image, where we have so Douglass and his sort of, in a way, J.P. Bore. These are, you know, in a way, the leaders of an aesthetic revolution.
We see it
tied in
politics. Yes, we see it all in image. And then this notion here of Ruddy Roy's, you know, we look at this beauty and reflection in the mirror, the reflection of the mirror of history, and to see this image here, Ruddy Roy's, you know, heartbreaking image of a protest.
I hope I don't get killed for being Black today. I mean, this is something that was on Douglass's mind. And the fact that, you know, in the 21st century, this is still something that's very much on the kind of Black citizens of this country's minds, and Black citizens across the world. I think there's a way in which, you know, I mean, I just felt that, you know, this kind of collection of Nyon as a sort of dialectical conversation between the role of photography, and if we think about that in relationship to the next image that you were showing, which looks at, you know, Frederick Douglass's study, and we can see the role of photography, you know, in his collection and portraiture, and how important that was for him.
How installation works with that. And then I'm gonna stop sharing screen because we are 4 minutes over our time. But the image is central. As you said, I love the fact that you photographed the house in Anacostia, and we can see how Douglass used his walls as inspiration as well in terms of display. So I know we have a few questions, and we will open up.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. You guys are fantastic. Great overview, leads to so many other things. I wish we could all walk into the gallery and look at the show right now. Deb, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your new book, and maybe you could share a few things about your research process and how that project unfolded, and you know, maybe you did share a few images from the book, obviously, that you've been working on, but I'd love to hear more about it. I know some of the people in the audience would as well.
Yeah, it's really exciting. It really reflects some of the similar experiences of Isaac. I'm just interested in these untold stories, lesser known stories. And I think that we think about public monuments and memorials and thinking about what's going on today, but I started this research probably 10 years ago, worked on a book with Barbara Krauthammer on envisioning emancipation, found a number of images in terms of Civil War reenactments. And I began to think about how do we talk about the difficult moments that these Black soldiers experience, but also their mothers who wrote letters to Frederick Douglass, to Abraham Lincoln. And Frederick Douglass wrote letters responding to the call for these soldiers to join the 54th and other regiments. So it all started with that question: how do we think about Black identity, Black male identity through the Civil War soldier? And it just puzzled me, that history, and that's one of the experiences I wanted to share. So I know it's 3:50 and I'm keeping on time.
You're doing a great job. And I wanted to get back to your question, your notions of the archive. You know, it sounds so abstract when you just use that term, but it's clearly embedded in both of your research and work. Can you talk about what you're a little bit more about your personal experiences in archives, what they reveal about the truth, and maybe how they're even potentially tools of empowerment or voice. It's pretty clear in your work that it's there, but just a few more words on that I think would be helpful.
Well, I'll say mine. I just think about Alan Sekula. Had just finished a book, Black Photographers 1840 to 1940, and gave a lecture. And Alan Sekula, at the end of the lecture, he walked up to me and he gave me an article, Frederick Douglass, from Frederick Douglass's North Star.
Wow.
And the article, he said, you need to read this because this is about this, and the quote, Negroes can never have impartial portraits at the hands of white artists. It seems to us next to impossible for white men to take likenesses of Black men without grossly exaggerating their distinctive features. When I read that through the archive of Frederick Douglass, through the archive of a friend, Alan Sekula, who shared that with me, and it opened up another way for me. I was working at the Schomburg Center then, but it also opened up another way for me to address the archive and to think about these uncharacteristic images that reflected negatively on Black humanity. And I was interested in showing the beauty within that experience photographically.
Beautiful.
Yes, I think that's so amazing. The great Alan Sekula, but also amazing in terms of your work, Deborah. You know, there you are kind of doing this incredibly important work at a time where the question of civil society is still being debated, you know, where there's a struggle over who can, if you like, control it. And this contestation of, you know, the way in which sort of a civil war, I think of June Jordan's book titled Civil Wars. I think of what happened last week in Washington and this ongoing scenario of where basically this question of masculinity and the way in which this, the kind of race relations of that is, you know, in a way, in a very, I want to say in a psychological sense, is an ongoing sort of unfinished business in relationship to the struggle over representation, you know, to the fact, you know, that the Confederacy and how that's evoked, which is something, of course, in Douglas's time, you know, was, you know, being contested, and it's still being contested, and it's still being used in this kind of mythical manner. But I think for me, it was the archival impulse which gave me the keys to unlocking this kind of anxiety, which is not only at the heart of American culture, but I mean, only yesterday in the United Kingdom, the Conservative government has instigated a new law around the protection of its monuments, you know, and have gone through this kind of protocol in relationship to how monuments should be treated or not, if you like, targeted, you know. So it's this sort of idea of what is representation of culture, and in terms of its memory, and the indexicality that these images, monuments, carry and signify into the present. And so I think they're there, signifying their power, and our job is to deconstruct that and to give it this other view, this other gaze, you know, that Douglass spoke about. You showed the images of looking for Langston, and you know, focus on who's looking, you know, who's authoring, who's picturing. And I think all of these are just, they're really central concerns, I think. And I think we haven't seen the last of them as concerns.
No, unfortunately, and that's where, you know, no one talks about education in this fight for justice, you know. But if it started with education, if we could start with how we are educated, with the Department of Education, you know, we can talk about how we're educated to make sure that there are a broad understanding, you know, of what this country, how Black people built this country, the experiences of it. And I think that that's the essence of it. And this visual experience that we're sharing is central.
That's fantastic. And you all are filling a huge gap there. I'm going to jump to you, Isaac, quickly on this education question. We're getting a lot of questions about how your research and process went into making of Lessons of the Hour. And how did you conceive it in its presentation a little bit more? How did you approach the film installation at McEvoy Arts? And for me, perhaps this is a moment where you might share a little bit how you brought your lab and UC Santa Cruz to the project. And then my last comment on yours, Deb, is that I think you both are filling in some major gaps here in our education about Black history and about Black representation of the self, because it's not, you know, because it's absence, right? You're filling in those gaps, and it's so critical. Anyway, Isaac, if you could tap in on that topic a little bit.
Sure. I mean, I think there's a way in which the approach to making the work, as I spoke about earlier, we really tried to follow some of the kind of themes of how we approached the making of Looking for Langston, which is to sort of, in a way, let photography lead in terms of the ways in which it can signify all the nuances and the spaces and the ways in which it kind of led a certain path for unlocking what is hidden to a certain extent. And I think my role is to take the archives of letters, of historians, of scholars, of visual culture, and to reanimate those with a spirit that can communicate in a contemporaneous manner, the kind of thoughts and gestures and attitudes which are part of a quest, and that quest is connected to the ways in which we can really envision ourselves and remodel the ways in which certain spaces remain blanked off, but in fact, indeed, are signifying so many treasures. You know, so I think there's a way in which the installation, which McEvoy was so amazingly supportive in terms of installing, and the attention to detail in terms of all those references, visual references to the 19th century, to photography, to painting, the salon hang, the scenography, all of those things are really about trying to reinstall that sense of agency. And we can see the agency is alive and well if we think about the whole, you know, Floyd George scenario. You know, photography was there, used as the sort of, if you like, apparatus that reignited the Black Lives Matter movement. You know, so its pivotal role is still so central to the ways in which we can respond to such atrocities. And I believe that J.P. Ball was doing exactly that in terms of the amazing sequence of images that Deborah shared with us of this freed Black man who, was photographed so ghastly in terms of the way in which this kind of spectacle has been something which we have to say is a fascination in American culture, you know. But love is the message, and I think the message is not death. Actually, it's about, you know, how we can look to the archive as this kind of eros of struggle for desire, for the preservation of agency, which we know has always been there in terms of Black lives.
Fantastic. We're approaching the end here. Deb, did you have any last comments or thoughts?
I'm just so pleased to be here, and I am honored by this invitation, and just want to say thank you to the Neon and the Neon and the collection, and to all of you who are in a part of this experience. And Isaac, you know, thank you.
It was such an honor to be with you, really. I've been so excited about this.
Yeah, I remember when you called me, what, 2 months ago, right?
Really, it's a great honor to be in conversation with you, and one has indeed been very fortunate to be able to show this work at this particular time in such a magnificent way by Nion's Foundation and
Thank you.
his wonderful
Thank you both.
team.
Thank you.
It's been an honor for all of us. Thank you. I speak for everybody in the room, and good luck, and please take care. Stay safe.
Okay, you too.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.